Hi, fourth graders. So I'm here to read our next chapter in Farmer Boy. We are getting down to it. We only have about 3 weeks left, and we still have quite a few chapters left. So I'm going to be having you do a few more chapters than you're used to in a week. I'm going to have you do 4, so that way we can get through the book to the end, before the end of the school year. So we're going to be reading Early Harvest. It starts on page 228, so you can follow along in your book. Or you can just, watch the video and watch through this as well. But make sure you're using that book to answer those questions. I'm still getting some answers that are not complete sentences. They're not using information from the book to help you answer your question thoroughly and thoughtfully. Please, we only have 3 weeks left, and then you have lots of time away from school this summer. So please show me your best work. Don't just, do a, not a very good job just to get it done, because your grade is reflective of that. Alrighty, so Early Harvest. Now it was haying time. Father brought out the scythes, and Almanzo turned the grindstone with one hand and poured a little stream of water on it with the other hand, while Father held the steel edges delicately against the whirring stone. So this is the grindstone, and see how Almanzo would be turning this, and they would be pouring water on it, and then Father would kind of move the blade of the scythe back and forth. And a scythe is kind of like, I don't know, it's similar to what like the Grim Reaper holds. It has a blade on the end of it that's like a crescent moon almost shape on it, and that's what they're going to be using to cut the hay. They don't have machinery, remember, like we have. They have horses that pull wagons and plows and different things. So this cutting the hay is going to be done by hand, and then loaded up onto a wagon to be brought back to the barn, and then pitchforked back in. They also don't bale their hay. They just pitchfork it into the barn. The water kept the scythes from getting too hot, while the stone ground their edges thin and sharp. Then Almanzo went through the woods to the little French cabins and told French Joe and Lazy John to come to work next morning. As soon as the sun dried the dew on the meadows, Father and Joe and John began cutting the hay. They walked side by side, swinging their scythes into the tall grass, and the plumed timothy fell in great swaths. Swish, swish, swish went the scythes, while Almanzo and Pierre and Louis followed behind them, spreading out the heavy swaths with pitchforks so that they would dry evenly in the sunshine. So just like now when you see farmers out there with their rake, the machine that goes behind their tractor, and it kind of mixes up the hay that's on the ground, and that's what the boys are doing behind them, is they're spreading out the hay so that way it dries, because it's not good to put wet hay into a barn. You need it to be really dry. The stubble was soft and cool under their bare feet. Birds flew up before the mowers now and then, and a rabbit jumped and bounded away. High up in the air the meadowlark sang. The sun grew hotter, the smell of the hay grew stronger and sweeter. Then waves of heat began to come up from the ground. Almanzo's brown arms burned browner, and sweat trickled on his forehead. The men stopped to put green leaves in the crowns of their hats, and so did the boys. For a little while the leaves were cool on top of their heads. In the middle of the morning Mother blew the dinner horn. Almanzo knew what that meant. He stuck his pitchfork in the ground and went running and skipping down across the meadows to the house. Mother met him on the back porch with the milk pail brimming full of cold eggnog. So they're not going to go inside and eat dinner. Remember, dinner is lunch. They're going to stay out in the field working. So Almanzo goes down to get the eggnog. Eggnog is a thick, rich drink that's going to have a lot of protein and coat their bellies and get them so that they are able to, keep working through the rest of the day. The eggnog was made of milk and cream with plenty of eggs and sugar. Its foamy top was freckled with spices, and pieces of ice floated in it. The sides of the pail were misty with cold. Almanzo trudged slowly toward the hayfield with the heavy pail and the dipper. He thought to himself that the pail was too full. He might spill some of the eggnog. Mother said waste was sinful. He was sure it would be sinful to waste a drop of that eggnog. He should do something to save it. So he set down the pail. He dipped the dipper full, and he drank. The cold eggnog slid smoothly down his throat, and it made him cool inside. When he reached the hayfield, everyone stopped work. They stood in the shade of an oak and pushed back their hats and passed the dipper from hand to hand till all the eggnog was gone. Almanzo drank his full share. The breeze seemed cool now, and Lazy John said, wiping the foam from his mustache, "Ah, that puts heart into a man." Now the men whetted their scythes, making the whetstones ring gaily on the steel blades, and they went back to work with a will. Father always maintained that a man could do more work with his 12 hours if he had a rest and all the eggnog he could drink morning and afternoon. They all worked in the hayfield as long as there was light enough to see what they were doing, and the chores were done by lantern light. Next morning the swaths had dried, and the boys raked them into windrows with big light wooden rakes that Father had made. Then Joe and John went on cutting hay, and Pierre and Louis spread the swaths behind them, but Almanzo worked in the hay rack. Father drove it up from the barns, and Father and Royal pitched the windrows into it, while Almanzo trampled them down. Back and forth he ran on the sweet-smelling hay, packing it down as fast as Father and Royal pitched it into the rack. So the reason why he needs to run back and forth on the hay is not for fun, not to have fun just running. It's so that way the hay gets pushed down. If they just threw the hay in there, it would just be super light and fluffy, right? And then they couldn't put as much hay in the hay rack, which is basically a big wagon with sides on it. So Almanzo needed to run back and forth, stomping it down so they could fit more hay into the wagon, because they want to do less trips back and forth from the field to the barn. When the rack would hold no more, he was high in the air on top of the load. There he lay on his stomach and kicked up his heels while Father drove down to the big barn. The load of hay barely squeezed under the top of the tall doorway, and it was a long slide to the ground. Father and Royal pitched the hay into the haymow, while Almanzo took the water jug to the well. He pumped, then jumped and caught the gushing cold water in his hand and drank. He carried water to Father and Royal, and he filled the jug again. Then he rode back in the empty hay rack and trampled down another load. Almanzo liked haying time. From dawn till long after dark every day he was busy, always doing different things. It was like play, and morning and afternoon there was the cold eggnog. But after 3 weeks of making hay, all the hay mows were crammed to bursting, and the meadows were bare. Then the rush of harvest time came. So there's that magic 3 again, right? That again and again, that tells you that 3 is an important number here. The oats were ripe, standing thick and tall and yellow. The wheat was golden, darker than the oats. The beans were ripe, and the pumpkins and carrots and turnips and potatoes were ready to gather. There was no rest and no play for anyone now. They all worked from candlelight to candlelight, meaning candlelight in the morning and candlelight at night. Mother and the girls were making cucumber pickles, green tomato pickles, and watermelon rind pickles. They were drying corn and apples and making preserves. Everything must be saved, nothing wasted of all the summer's bounty. Even the apple cores were saved for making vinegar, and a bundle of oat straw was soaking in a tub on the back porch. Whenever Mother had 1 minute to spare, she braided an inch or two of oat straw braid for making next summer's hats. The oats were not cut with scythes, but with cradles. Cradles had blades like scythes, but they also had long wooden teeth that caught the cut stalks and held them. When they had cut enough for a bundle, Joe and John slid the stalks off in neat piles. Father and Royal and Almanzo followed behind, binding them into sheaves. Almanzo had never bound oats before. Father showed him how to knot 2 handfuls of stalks into a long band, then how to gather up an armful of grain, pull the band tightly around the middle, twist its ends together, and tuck them in tightly. In a little while he could bind a sheaf pretty well, but not very fast. Father and Royal could bind oats as fast as the reapers cut them. Just before sunset, the reapers stopped reaping, and they all began shocking the sheaves. All the cut oats must be shocked before dark, because they would spoil if they lay on the ground in the dew overnight. Almanzo could shock oats as well as anybody. He stood 10 sheaves up on their ends, close together with all the heads of grain upward. Then he set 2 more sheaves on top, and spread out their stems to make a roof over the 10 sheaves. The shocks looked like little Indian wigwams dotted all over the field of pale stubble. The wheat field was waiting. There was no time to lose. As soon as all the oats were in the shock, everyone hurried to cut and bind and shock the wheat. It was harder to handle because it was heavier than the oats, but Almanzo manfully did his best. Then there was a field of oats and Canada peas. The pea vines were tangled all through the oats, so they could not be shocked. Almanzo raked them into long windrows. Already it was high time to pull the navy beans. Alice had to help with them. Father hauled the bean stakes to the field and set them up, driving them into the ground with them all. Then Father and Royal hauled the shocked grain to the barns, while Almanzo and Alice pulled the beans. First they laid rocks all around the bean stakes to keep the beans off the ground. Then they pulled up the beans. With both hands they pulled till their hands could hold no more. They carried the beans to the stakes and laid the roots against them, spreading the long vines out on the rocks. Layer after layer of beans they piled around each stake. The roots were bigger than the vines, so the pile grew higher and higher in the middle. The tangled vines, full of rattling bean pods, hung down all around. When the roots were piled to the tops of the stakes, Almanzo and Alice laid vines over the top, making a little roof to shed rain. Then that bean stake was done, and they began another one. The stakes were as tall as Almanzo, and the vines stood out around them like Alice's hoop skirts. One day when Almanzo and Alice came to dinner, the butter buyer was there. He came every year from New York City. He wore fine city clothes with a gold watch and chain, and he drove a good team. Everybody liked the butter buyer, and dinner time was exciting when he was there. He brought all the news of politics and fashions and prices in New York City. So here's another person who comes from a distance away or from away, and someone that they enjoy having. These people who come, like the tin peddler and now the butter buyer, are kind of they're like entertainment for the Wilders, because they don't see a lot of different people. And in New York City, that's a completely different atmosphere than on the farm where the Wilders are living up here. So they like hearing all these stories. And remember, Mother's been doing butter all summer long. Now, she makes enough for them to use at home, but she also makes enough to be able to sell. After dinner, Almanzo went back to work, but Alice stayed to watch Mother sell the butter. The butter buyer went down cellar, where the butter tub stood covered with clean white cloths. Excuse me. Mother took off the cloths, and the butter buyer pushed his long steel butter tester down through the butter to the bottom of the tub. The butter tester was hollow with a slit on one side, and when he pulled it out, there in the slit was the long sample of butter. Mother did not do any bargaining at all. She said proudly, "My butter speaks for itself." So she didn't have to be a shrewd trader like she was with the tin man or the tin peddler, because her butter is all good. The butter buyer is just making sure that it's all the same color throughout. There aren't streaks in it, and there aren't any holes or air bubbles or gaps or anything. That it's all packed nice and tight and nice and the same consistency. Not one sample from all her tubs had a streak in it. From top to bottom of every tub, Mother's butter was all the same golden, firm, sweet butter. Excuse me. Almanzo saw the butter buyer drive away, and Alice came skipping to the bean field, swinging her sunbonnet by its strings. She called out, "Guess what he did?" "What?" Almanzo asked. "He said Mother's butter is the best butter he has ever seen anywhere. And he paid her. Guess what he paid her? 50 cents a pound." Almanzo was amazed. He had never heard of such a price for butter. "She had 500 pounds, Alice said. "That's $250. He paid her all that money, and she's hitching up right now to take it to the bank." So remember, the last time they had a lot of money in the house, it made Mother very nervous, and they nearly got robbed when the horse buyer came. So Mother wants to make sure that this money is safe and in the bank, so she does not have to worry. In a little while, Mother drove away in her second-best bonnet and her black bombazine. She was going to town in the afternoon, on a weekday, in harvest time. She had never done such a thing before. But Father was busy in the fields, and she would not keep all that money in the house overnight. Almanzo was proud. His mother was probably the best butter maker in the whole of New York State. People in New York City would eat it and say to one another how good it was and wonder who made it. So that is the end of Early Harvest. I hope you're enjoying this book. Please make sure you're doing a very good job, your very, very best job on the questions, and I will see you soon. Bye.